Well, as you may know, rapper 50 Cent has been teasing a documentary about his purported rival, Sean Diddy Combs, for more than a year. But now the 4-part docuseries has finally premiered on Netflix. The series explores Combs' life, from his upbringing, the creation of Bad Boy Entertainment, to all of the allegations of assault and sexual abuse since the 1990s. And it also investigates his alleged connection to the deaths of iconic rappers Biggie Smalls and Tupac Shakur, featuring insights from those close to him, witnesses from his racketeering and sex trafficking trial, and jurors who heard weeks of testimony. So we're not only going
Everything erupts the moment the latest scandal breaks, and the entire scene shifts overnight. The reaction comes fast, sharp, and brutal, cutting through the noise like a blade. The commentary starts pouring in, not from polished interviews or staged statements, but from someone who has never held back, never sugarcoated anything, never pretended to be polite when there's no reason to be.
Sentence after he was convicted on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution during his very high-profile federal trial earlier this year. A jury acquitted him of the top charges in the indictment, conspiracy to engage in racketeering, as well as 2 counts of sex trafficking. Now, the allegations against Combs, they have dominated the headlines since November of 2023. That's when his ex, Cassandra Ventura Fine, filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the music mogul, claiming he abused her during their 10-year relationship. And since then, he's not only faced this criminal trial, but also dozens of civil lawsuits that were filed on behalf of alleged victims. And many of the lawsuits include claims of sexual misconduct and rape and more. But to be clear, Combs and his legal team, they have adamantly denied any and all accusations of wrongdoing. Since Combs' arrest at the Park Hyatt Hotel in Manhattan in September of 2024, there have been several documentaries that have been released about the rapper's rise to the top of the music industry. There have been shows about his trial, but one of the most anticipated retrospectives is from a reportedly years-long rival of Combs, rapper Curtis Jackson, better known as 50 Cent. He is the executive producer of this project, initially teasing it with the title Diddy Do It, but the series was retitled Sean Combs: The Reckoning. It was released on Netflix on December 2nd, and it has skyrocketed to the top of the charts. In fact, 50 Cent posted on his Instagram on Wednesday, #1 on Netflix. You know, if you really like this docuseries, I'll make more, LOL. Now, the documentary's director, Alexandra Stapleton, said in a statement to Billboard, quote, "This isn't just about the story of Sean Combs or the story of Cassie or the story of any of the victims or the allegations against him or the trial. Ultimately, this story is a mirror reflecting us as the public and what we are saying when we put our celebrities on such a high pedestal. I hope this documentary is a wake-up call for how we idolize people and to understand that everybody is a human being." Okay, but here's the thing. Just one day before the series was set to air, Combs' attorneys sent a cease and desist letter to the streaming giant, calling the documentary essentially a hit piece, demanding it be removed. Now we're going to take a closer look at that letter, the arguments that Combs' team is making for all of this to be taken down. But first, I want to talk about some of the biggest, maybe most shocking moments from the series, and then we'll get to the C&D letter. So to do all that, I want to welcome back on Elizabeth Vulai, legal counsel here at Law and Crime, who knows a thing or two about the inner workings of the media and when things are brought in. But you also watched the entire show. Elizabeth, it's good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. Now, you watched all of it. What was your main takeaway from the series? As somebody who actively followed the Diddy criminal case, has been here on Sidebar talking about the case, talking about his civil cases that he's facing, what was your main takeaway?
Yeah, there were a couple of takeaways. I think it was a really sort of original documentary, well put together. There were 4 episodes, usually most of them around an hour long, so it's very thorough. I think the 2 key takeaways were, one, everybody's talking about access to this footage and where it came from. One of the things that I think Diddy had done was he had said he'd hired a videographer. He's someone who films himself, as we've come to know, for most of his career and life. So he had hired this videographer to kind of follow him through this process. I'm not sure if the thinking was, he thought that he might evade the charges and come out with his own documentary afterwards. But just the access of footage that we get, we hear him speaking to his legal team. It's very rare you get an insight into that because, again, that's usually covered under attorney-client privilege. So speaking to his legal team, kind of his own thoughts about what was going on, because also remember, at this point, we really hadn't heard Diddy talk much about this. He had issued an apology over that video of him and Cassandra Ventura in that hotel hallway months before, but he hadn't really given any interviews to the media. He hadn't spoken about it, probably on advice of his attorneys. So getting access to that kind of information.
And as this new scandal explodes, The response is even more explosive, because this time the situation is darker, deeper, and more twisted than anyone expected. The fallout hits instantly, the public shakes, the entire industry freezes, and the commentary begins. It starts with that unmistakable tone of someone who has seen it all, someone who has survived things that would have broken a lot of people, someone who knows exactly how the game works and is sick of watching the same cycle repeat itself. And when this new scandal erupts around the mysterious figure at the center of the chaos, the commentary doesn't hold back. It dives straight into the heart of it, exposing the rot, the hypocrisy, the fake smiles, the hidden secrets that everyone pretended not to see. This isn't surface-level drama. This is decades of patterns boiling over. This is the moment where the masks fall off. This is where the truth starts clawing its way out no matter how many people try to bury it. And the one delivering the commentary knows exactly what they're looking at, because they've watched this figure build an empire on image, bravado, and illusions. They've watched the parties, the wealth, the power.
Documentary, I think in like episode 4, when it was going into the trial or in his arrest. It was interesting. I'll talk more. I am curious about what you think of that footage, and we'll talk about how it factors into the cease and desist letter. First of all, no attorney-client privilege, because if he is actively, deliberately, knowingly recording that, the privilege, anything that he says to his attorney, that's waived, right?
Correct. So that was one of the first thoughts I had is he's speaking to Mark Agnifilo, who's the lead attorney on his legal team. They're talking about, overall case strategy, the indictment that they expect to come down. My first thought was, we've never seen this before. This must be privileged. But again, you forget there's a videographer in the room. So when you think about attorney-client communications, yes, that's usually covered under privilege. But if you have a third party that you're inviting into those communications, that's not necessary, unless the person is an interpreter or maybe an accountant. If you have a videographer that's there not for legal reasons, you can make that argument that, the privilege is waived.
And by the way, that conversation, the actual context of it, it's something that we always were thinking was going on behind the scenes. There was a sense of frustration about how the media and social media was portraying Diddy and the narrative, and he was like, we're losing. And he was getting a bit combative with Mark Agnifilo about what was going on. And he's like, look, I did everything. You said I'm basically an ideal client, a star client. I did everything you want. I came to New York. And like, he was just waiting to see if he would be arrested and indicted. And that was like a bit of tension there, which it's a rare behind the scenes glimpse of what those conversations and what those moments are between an accused and their defense attorney before the hammer drops.
Yes, very rare. And that's, I think, one of the things that struck me and what a lot of people are talking about. Again, you don't usually get a window into that. I think the push and pull was, in the conversation, Mark Agnifilo had said, look, an indictment hasn't been dropped yet. The indictment came down September 16th of last year. And Mark Agnifilo had said it's mid-September at that point. So I think the indictment was really just about to drop. So at that point, you have Diddy who, he said, look, I've come to New York. I've basically surrendered. His legal team is taking the position you have to cooperate and kind of show that you're here ready to take this head on. But then Diddy's sort of saying, we need to get someone out there on the comms front, as somebody who is, in his words, has dealt with the dirty side of media and propaganda. So I think what Diddy was trying to say was, there's nothing to be done legally on the criminal front because no indictment had been dropped yet. But in the court of public opinion, it seemed like he wanted to take a more aggressive approach to put a certain message out there. And his attorney seemed to kind of think the opposite.
And just to be clear, so the documentary begins with this shot of Combs in his hotel room in New York. This is, I believe, just 6 days before his arrest last year. Turns out Combs had hired this videographer to film him while he's in New York. The documentary's producers got their hands on this footage, and he's talking on speakerphone with Mark Agnifilo, this high-powered attorney, who is, by the way, just one of several lawyers he would have on his multi-person legal team, and says that more needs to be done to help his public image, that it appeared to him like they were losing. And remember, again, this is before he was officially indicted and arrested. Now, apparently he knew it was coming. He'd been under investigation for months at this point. In a statement to NBC News, Combs' publicist, Judah Engelmeyer, said, quote, "The footage was created for an entirely different purpose under an arrangement that was never completed, and no rights were ever transferred to Netflix. A payment dispute between outside parties does not create permission for Netflix to use unlicensed private material. None of this footage came from Mr. Combs or his team, and its inclusion raises serious questions about
the control. They've watched the public worship the persona without ever questioning what was happening behind closed doors. They've watched the media spin the narrative into something shiny and safe. but now everything is cracking open, and the commentary dives into every fissure. It starts by pointing out the obvious: how strange it is that someone who portrayed themselves as untouchable is suddenly scrambling. The persona that once radiated confidence now looks hollow. The empire that once seemed indestructible now feels like a flimsy shell. And the commentary makes it clear that this didn't happen overnight. This collapse was baked into the foundation from the start. Every lie, every manipulation, every cover-up, every carefully engineered illusion added weight to the eventual downfall. And now that downfall is accelerating. The commentary shifts into the history of this mysterious figure, not with names, not with specifics, but with blunt truths. The rise to power was never as clean as it appeared. The success stories were riddled with shadows. The glamorous lifestyle was coated in layers.
How it was obtained and why Netflix chose to use it. Now, Elizabeth, we're going to talk more about what Combs' legal team has to say in this cease and desist letter, but what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, it's hard to say because there's still such a big question mark in the air because, Curtis Jackson, aka 50 Cent, is one of the executive producers on the series. Him, the director, Netflix in general, is not saying where they got this footage, only that it was obtained legally. Diddy's side is saying this is coming from a videographer I hired. I know we'll get into the cease and desist. One of the arguments they make is, this is subject to NDAs or agreements that the videographer had signed with Diddy because he was, employed by Diddy, and therefore the footage belongs to Diddy. That's the argument that they're making. So it's difficult to say because Netflix is not really saying how or where they got this footage from. One of the things that they did say was that it was sent to them legally. So, if you have the videographer sending the footage to them physically, that would be fine, but it does leave a question mark about where the legal rights are coming from. The only really avenue I see is if there's some way that the videographer had obtained a license for the footage, then the videographer would have the ability to take that license and then transfer the footage over to Netflix. But if the footage belongs to Diddy, then that's a little bit tough.
That's a good point. Okay, let's keep that in mind. We'll talk about that in a minute. I do want to talk about the content of the series. So the series featured interviews with many people who were at one point in Combs' inner circle. This includes Aubrey O'Day, who was a member of the girl group Danity Kane, which was created on Combs' MTV show Making the Band. She has since accused Combs of basically grooming her, firing her for refusing to give in to his alleged sexual advances. We have Albie Shore, singer, songwriter, former record executive, dated Kim Porter before she was in a relationship with Combs. There's Roger Bonds, one of Combs' apparent former bodyguards, who's gone on the record to say that he knew Combs was allegedly physically violent with his then-girlfriend, Cassie. At one point in his interview with the documentary's producers, he said of Combs, "When I first met him, I liked him as a person because I didn't know him." You have Kalina Harper, who was part of Combs' group Diddy Dirty Money, released a statement supporting him after the third member of that group, Dawn Richard, had filed a lawsuit against Combs. And in the documentary, Combs can be heard calling Harper to complain about the lawsuit, asking her to put out a statement. A former friend, business partner of Combs, who appears throughout the documentary, is Kirk Burroughs, the co-founder of Bad Boy Records. The two apparently worked very closely together for years. Burroughs served as the general manager, handling the rapidly growing company's funds. And according to Burroughs, when they started Bad Boy, Burroughs was given a 25% stake in the company, with the other 75% being in Combs' mother's name, Janice Combs' name. And we're going to get more into why Burroughs alleges it was set up that way in just a second. But according to Burroughs, Combs allegedly threatened him in 1996 with a baseball bat, forcing him to sign over his stake. So Burroughs apparently sued in 2003. The lawsuit was thrown out because too much time had passed since the alleged incident. And more recently, Burroughs sued Janice Combs for fraud, Combs himself for sexual harassment. This is according to a report from Cinemaholic. And those appear to be ongoing, by the way. Now, Burroughs claims that he was blacklisted from the entertainment industry, led to periods of homelessness. He's since re-entered the music industry, starting Pop Life Entertainment in 2018. This is also per Cinemaholic. So, Elizabeth, there's a lot here. But what did you make of the Burroughs part, where he was proving, this kind of relationship that he had, and that he was coerced into giving up his stake in what would become a multi-million-dollar company? I mean, I guess the allegation is basically that Diddy ruined his life.
Yeah, that was there are a lot of difficult moments in the documentary. I watched all 4 episodes as mentioned, and that was a tough one. And again, information that we hadn't really seen before in prior documentaries.
Years of secrecy and fear. The commentary reveals that people whispered about strange things for years, but no one dared to speak publicly. No one wanted to be the first to challenge the narrative. No one wanted to risk exile from the powerful circles that controlled so much of the industry. But now those whispers have become screams. The commentary describes how the new scandal is different, not because it's more shocking than previous rumors, but because the public finally has the courage to face what's been in front of them. And the one delivering the commentary says it with that unmistakable blend of frustration and vindication, the feeling of someone who saw the storm coming long before anyone else did. They describe the reactions across the industry. Some people panic, some pretend they knew nothing, some rush to distance themselves, some scramble to protect their own interests, and yet a few, a very small few, step forward with a kind of brutal honesty that cuts through the PR fog. That honesty is what sends shockwaves through the entire scene. The commentary breaks.
So, this is someone who had co-founded Bad Boy Entertainment with him. A lot of the things he was saying seemed to kind of run along the theme that I think prosecutors were trying to push in the actual case, was that in the prosecutor's view, this is somebody who will do anything to basically get what he wants. He doesn't really care what effects or damage that causes to other people. And it's in different ways, right? Whether it's in the context of alleged abuse, business disputes, alleged sexual assaults, things that have been alleged in the civil lawsuits against him. And I think with Burroughs, it was really, kind of seemed to strike that theme as well, because he's saying, he had forced me out of the stake of my company. He had to deal with things like homelessness, while in the 2000s and 2010s, Diddy was really prospering, music, business, fashion. And one of the things that he had said, what he alleged in the documentary, and again, this is an allegation from him, was that the name Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs's name was not really involved in that on the corporate side. And one of the things he's saying is the reason for that was to avoid having to pay any liability from, the devastating basketball game that had happened in the early 90s, where he was the subject of wrongful death lawsuits because of the multiple deaths that had occurred as a result of that basketball game that Diddy was behind organizing. So that was really, surprising to hear.
Yeah, that was a big allegation, because the families of the victims killed in that stampede, it was horrible. We're talking about December 28th, 1991. Combs, fellow rapper Heavy D, they hosted this charity basketball game. The game took place at the gymnasium of the City College of New York. And according to the New York Daily News, before the basketball game started, people who weren't let inside, they broke a window, swarmed toward the entrance of the gym, all went down a staircase. The doors at the bottom of those stairs open towards the stairs, not towards the gym. So once a crowd got down there, they couldn't get the doors open and people started being crushed. 9 people died, dozens of others were injured. And there were no criminal charges that were ever filed against anyone for the stampede, but multiple families and injured victims, they filed lawsuits. And that's just one part, right? So I actually wanted to get into this too. The docuseries devoted a lot of time to the killings of Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls, and Combs' alleged connections to this, to both men, obviously knew both of them. So there have been accusations made in the past that Combs' involvement in the East Coast, West Coast rap feud of the 90s, there was more than just talk, that it could have involved things like hit orders. Now, to be clear, these are allegations. There's no evidence to suggest this. This series, though, it emphasizes that he has never been investigated or charged regarding their assassinations. Nevertheless, several interviewees during this documentary expressed that Combs' actions seem suspicious in hindsight. The documentary plays part of an interview that Dwayne "Keefe D. Davis did with investigators looking into Tupac's murder, which had become a cold case. And on the tapes, Keefe D. says that Combs agreed to pay him if he killed Tupac and also rival record label head Suge Knight. Now, Davis allegedly admitted that his nephew Orlando Anderson was the one who shot the men, killing Tupac, injuring Knight. But Davis says Combs never came through with any payment. And by the way, Davis is currently awaiting trial for Tupac's murder in Las Vegas. Combs has always denied any involvement in the assassination. That was a big moment, I would say. Elizabeth, that was a big part of this. I didn't know that was going to be a part of this documentary.
I was really surprised as well. So I believe it's the second episode that dedicates a lot of time to it. And like you said, there have been insinuations in the past. They played video clips of, Sean Combs being asked in prior interviews in the 90s and 2000s, do you know, who killed these men? Did you have any involvement? He's always denied it. To be clear, these are just allegations. But yeah, that was really, really shocking. And one of the sort of a little bit more of the backstory behind his alleged involvement with Tupac was that a lot of the interviewees in the documentary were saying that Biggie, who was signed with
down the contradictions. How the figure at the center of the scandal always preached loyalty while operating in ways that betrayed everyone around them. How they portrayed themselves as a visionary while building a world fueled by manipulation. How they used power to control everything from narratives to relationships to careers. How they crafted an image of generosity while draining the life out of those who trusted them. And the commentary delivers it all without hesitation. It digs into the psychological collapse happening behind the public facade. The commentary talks about the fear radiating from someone who was once unstoppable, the desperation to hold on to a legacy that is now crumbling, the paranoia that comes when the walls start closing in, the realization that the empire was never solid, just loud, and now the noise is gone. The commentary explores the symbolism of the unraveling. The once lavish lifestyle looks grotesque when the truth starts leaking out. The media appearances feel staged. The carefully curated displays of power now look like pathetic attempts to distract from the chaos. And the commentary drives home one message.
With Bad Boy, and who was really close with Diddy at the time, was starting to form a friendship with Tupac, and they were getting really close. And a lot of the interviewees were saying, in their view, Diddy didn't really appreciate that. So I think that a lot of the themes that you see again is coming up as him sort of wanting and needing to be the number one person in people's lives, whether it was personal, business. And it's really interesting because you see a lot of the themes that, again, the prosecution was trying to push forward that we saw in his personal life with Cassandra Ventura, always needing to be number one, not necessarily regarding the damages he's doing to other people in the prosecution's eyes, right? Playing out in the business sense. So the backstory is that he didn't appreciate the friendship that was forming between Biggie and Tupac, and therefore, that's where his alleged involvement came in. And then when, in terms of the non-payment, I think that was also a really shocking moment as well, because that's something we saw happening over and over in the documentary. Multiple people who were saying, I was cheated out of my share in the company. I wasn't paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. And allegedly, that's sort of how he treated the artists that were on his label. So again, it's the theme of always wanting to be number one and, not necessarily giving people their due, business sense or personal sense.
Okay, so with that, I will tell you, I think one of the most shocking allegations comes to Biggie Smalls, okay? You talk about finances, you talk about that, okay. One of the biggest names at Bad Boy, seemingly very close friends with Sean Combs. Well, according to Kirk Burrows, Combs, and again, this is his allegation, according to Kirk Burrows, Combs insisted that Biggie travel to Los Angeles as part of an album tour. And this is despite, the serious dangers that were present from the rivalries, the East Coast, West Coast. And once there, Combs allegedly decided to cancel a trip that Biggie was supposed to take to the UK, instead saying he needed to stay in LA. Combs apparently threw a large party, and after which, someone opened fire on the car that Biggie was riding in, killing him. Now, Burrows alleges that Combs used all of this publicity around Biggie's murder and his massive funeral to just gain his own fame for his own benefit, shooting to the top of the charts with the song Missing You, which featured, by the way, Biggie's widow. But this was one salacious claim that I really wasn't expecting. According to Burrows, Combs, allegedly, charged the costs of that massive funeral to Biggie's estate and had Biggie's recently renegotiated contract changed to make it more favorable for Bad Boy Records and less favorable for Biggie's loved ones after his death. Elizabeth, again, that one I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, it was really unexpected. And again, I think it speaks to the strength of the documentary, just at least creatively and what they were able to get in terms of the interviewees, claims that we hadn't heard before. So the claims were that, he had wanted, in the documentary, the interviews talk about, Diddy had said, we need to put on the biggest funeral New York has ever seen for Biggie. And when apparently, allegedly, when he saw how much it would cost, that's when he had said, we'll be charging this to the estate, allegedly. One of the other things was he had wanted to put out that song about Biggie after he had passed away, and that was really a big moment. He had performed it at the MTV Movie Awards. And then one of the other claims was, Biggie was set to debut on the cover of Rolling Stone, or at least be on the cover of Rolling Stone. And allegedly, one of the interviewees says after he had passed, Sean Combs had called him and said, I'm coming out with my first solo album. I need that cover. So Sean Combs had allegedly taken that cover from Biggie even after he had passed away. And again, it kind of rides to this theme of, in the public, his friend had passed away. He was devastated. But sort of what you see behind the scenes, at least what the documentary is alleging, is all the different ways he's using that to help benefit him financially and in terms of his career, which is something that we hadn't seen before. And, even myself, like I'm sure you empathize, Jesse, as a millennial, we grew up seeing Diddy, knowing the backstory of him and Biggie and sort of knowing that song and thinking, oh, they were close friends.
The downfall is not surprising. It was inevitable. Halfway through, the tone grows darker. The commentary starts connecting the deeper layers of the scandal, patterns of behavior that were dismissed as eccentric but now look predatory and calculated. The commentary describes how manipulation becomes normalized when someone is allowed unlimited power, how cycles of abuse continue when people fear retaliation, how silence is maintained when the industry depends on the illusion of success. The commentary exposes the network of people who look the other way, whether out of fear or greed, and it ruthlessly dismantles the excuses, calling them out as pathetic attempts to avoid accountability. As the commentary goes deeper, it reveals the emotional aftermath of the scandal. The mysterious figure at the center is shown as someone who built their identity on dominance, not integrity, and now that dominance is slipping away, leaving them fragile, angry, and terrified. The commentary describes it in visceral detail.
So that was basically the decision.
Now, the big news, some of the big news, a lot of big news came out after the trial, was the firing of Maureen Comey, the lead prosecutor in this case. Now, there's obviously a political angle to it. There are comments that she has made, but I have to ask, you going head to head against her for so many weeks, months and before that, the firing of her, what did you make of that?
I think it was unfortunate. She's a very well-respected prosecutor. We had good sort of professional relationships with her during the course of the trial. And, I don't really think it had anything to do with the trial, but I can't really say anything beyond that. It just,
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. Let's talk about something we can get into quite a bit. Let's talk bail. Okay, so we did a previous sidebar breaking down the defense's renewed motion for release, several arguments for why Sean Combs, should be released on bail pending sentencing, acquitted of the most serious charges. There's no comparable case of someone who is convicted of the Mann Act alone and not engaging in sex trafficking or a prostitution for financial gain, and they would be locked up like this. Talked about the issues plaguing the MDC, how it is dangerous, how he's not a risk of flight, not a danger to the community. But do you think Judge Arun Subramanian is going to be persuaded by your letter, by your motion? Because obviously he specifically highlighted after the verdict your client's violence, how the defense asserted at trial that Combs was violent. Do you think he's going to have a change of opinion now based upon the legal papers?
Well, I think we certainly hope so. And, as we pointed out in the papers, the unfortunate violence that occurred was mostly a really long time ago, other than the one incident in June that Jane testified to, which was kind of unusual. They had been together for 3 years. There had been no violence, and she essentially started the fight. I'm not excusing anything, but it was kind of a one-off. And I think the government really hadn't put in any evidence of any recent violence. The Intercontinental video, remember, that was almost 10 years ago. He broke up with Cassie in 2018. And in our reply papers yesterday, we submitted a letter from Gina Hyun, who was one of the alleged victims, a different ex-girlfriend. And I think it was a pretty powerful letter about how Sean has changed, how she's not concerned about violence. She thinks he should be released on bail. So we're hoping that that will persuade the judge, given everything else, particularly, as you noted, like the really, really unusual nature of this particular Mann Act conviction and the fact that he's already been in prison, or jail rather, for like 11 months. This case is a one-off to begin with, but we're not aware of any case like this with a Mann Act conviction where anyone's done that much time to begin with. So.
And prosecutors, I'm imagining, have come back or will come back and say, well, listen, look, after the raids on his property, he engaged, or what they will say, he allegedly engaged in criminal activity and, obviously violence, they say, with Jane. But they say, look, what was in his hotel room when he was picked up in New York. They made allegations of what he was trying to do while he was in the MDC, whether it was using other inmates' phone privileges to have three-way phone calls. That was litigated before trial. What would be your response to say, you make the point that he is a changed person, the violence that was shown during the course of this?
The empty rooms, the unanswered calls, the fake supporters disappearing, the desperation to maintain relevance, the fear of consequences. Then the commentary pivots. Because the more the commentary analyzed the situation, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a scandal. This was exposure. This was accountability. This was the fall of an empire finally catching up to itself. By the time the commentary finished, The narrative surrounding the scandal had completely changed. It was no longer about the initial accusations. It was about the entire structure of power that allowed those accusations to become possible. The world saw it. The industry felt it. And the empire couldn't escape it. The commentary left no room for denial, no room for excuses, no room for rewriting the story. It laid out the truth so clearly. It reflects on how scandals like this shape the culture, how they force people to rethink their heroes, how they expose the danger of worshipping personas, how they reveal the cost of silence, and how they make room for conversations that should have happened years ago. The commentary becomes almost philosophical, questioning why the public ignores red flags until everything explodes, questioning why power blinds people, questioning why corruption thrives in environments built on fame and money, and questioning whether the fall of one individual is enough to trigger real change. But the commentary doesn't end on hope. That would be too soft. Instead, it ends with a warning. It warns that the downfall of one figure doesn't erase the system that enabled them. It warns that more scandals will surface. It warns that the cycle will continue unless people stop glorifying illusions and start valuing truth. And it warns that anyone who builds their empire on manipulation, fear, and deception will eventually face the same fate: public collapse, exposed secrets, and the destruction of everything they fought to protect. By the time the commentary concludes, there's no sympathy left, no ambiguity, no hesitation, just a clear, unfiltered breakdown of how someone who once dominated everything has now become a symbol of their own undoing.